Mount Calvary, have you ever found yourself in a place where you felt in over your head? Maybe you felt the nudging of God's hand on your heart, calling you to embark upon a new and incredible life journey. Perhaps it's writing a book or moving to a new state. Maybe it's quitting your job to start a new career or launching a new ministry. Maybe it's pursuing another degree. Or maybe it's something that seems ordinary, like getting married or starting a family. If you're like me, you probably think all these things sound positive and reasonable. These are things that we want to experience in life. These are moments that seem like a good thing, a God thing, and yet sometimes right in the middle of that which is a blessing, we find ourselves shaking our heads and having some doubts about what God is doing in our lives. These doubts are not necessarily because what we're experiencing is bad, but they're because what we're experiencing has become foreign to us. Imagine, in a strange way, life for too many of us has become so mundane and routine, or even so disappointing, that unexpected good news and unforeseen blessings dishevel us a bit. Has anybody else ever felt that way? Y'all, sometimes good things make us uncomfortable. Dare I say that sometimes good things cause us to feel overwhelmed. And in response to this uncertainty and disorientation, something like a fight or flight response can be prompted in us. On the surface, we want to understand what God is doing in our lives. We see that it's incredible. We understand some of it. We know that God is trying to bless us. But in our quiet time, the negative thoughts and anxiety and feelings of nervousness flood our bodies. And often, because we do not know how to handle these feelings, we default back to our comfort zones. Psychologist Abraham Maslow says in moments like these, one will either step forward into growth or one will step back into safety. The reason this is the case is not that we're experiencing a real fight or flight moment. Rather, we're experiencing what could be referred to as growth discomfort. Y'all know growing pains. Growth discomfort can be described as the tension that arises when we're moving beyond familiar patterns, identities, abilities, or emotional limits, even when the direction that we're going is healthy, meaningful, and wanted. In this time of social and political unrest, I suspect most of us frequently experience a degree of excitement coupled with a dash of unease every week. It's in times like these that we're reminded that growth challenges everything we know. It challenges what feels safe to us. Sometimes growth even makes us feel isolated because where God is taking you and where God is taking me, our friends and family members aren't necessarily going there. This leg of the journey might be for us, but not for them. Growth is interesting, Mount Calvary, because growth is good for us, even when growth does not feel good to us. And it's in the place of growth discomfort where we each must make a personal decision about whether we will stand up or sit down, whether we will go with God or lean on our own understanding. It's in moments like these where we have to decide whether we will rise or run. Will we rise to the challenge of journeying towards God's promise, or run back to the safety of the familiar. Y'all, this is where we find ourselves in this morning's text. This is a familiar passage of scripture. It's in the book of Numbers, where we find the Israelites in the middle of their journey from bondage to promise. And yet we find God's chosen people irritated with their creator. See, the weight of the journey from Egypt to the promised land has caught up with them. And they're angry because they're tired of eating manna from heaven. That they're grumbling, they're complaining, and they talk about the wonderful slave food in Egypt. They talk about the fish, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, and the like. They are sick and tired of the daily bread the Lord continues to provide for them. And so in response to their complaints, the Lord sends some meat their way. And then they start to question, does God speak exclusively to Moses? Y'all, they start feeling themselves. And so when we enter this 13th chapter of Numbers, the Lord commanded Moses to send out men to explore the promised land. More importantly, it says from each tribe, Moses should send out one of its leaders. God gives them a glimpse of their promise in the middle of their frustration. But beloved, something happens with these Israelite leaders. They go scope out the land and they stumble. Those whose call is to rise seemingly want to run in the face of their promise. Because the promise is too big for them to understand. They feel like grasshoppers in the land of giants. It doesn't matter that these giants are the giants God promised would be theirs. They saw themselves as grasshoppers. And they felt too small to believe that they were worthy of God's great promises. Now, by default, the spies are leaders. That's what the text says. Send out leaders from each of the tribes. Don't get tight. I'm gonna tell you all my leadership philosophy. Spies are leaders, and so they ought to be different. But don't get upset, because I'm gonna tell you my philosophy on leadership. I believe every one of us is a leader. Leadership is not exclusively about position or title. It's about mindset and presence. So whether you realize it or not, you're leading somewhere. It might be on your job. It might be in your home. It might be in the community. It might be in your school. It might be among your circle of friends. It might be in this church. But we are all leaders in our own right. And leaders should be a little bit different. Leaders should have vision. They should have a certain level of comfort with risk. Leaders have been battle tested, so leaders ought not be quick to run in the face of a good thing that feels overwhelming. Because leaders rise knowing they can handle the heat of the moment. But the text tells us that when the leaders scope out the land, they stumble. I believe that that's a lesson for us right there. Rising must start at the top. It starts with the head, and it starts in the head. Rising starts with leaders, and it's rooted in our minds. It's rooted in the way we think. The text suggests that the Israelites have a moment of amnesia and forget that the God who brought them out of Egypt, the God who sent plagues to protect them while in slavery, the God who allowed them to be passed over, the God who allowed Pharaoh's army to be stopped in their tracks, the God who allowed them to face giants in their past, is still their present help. Bible said they go out on their mission. They see the promise and they still doubted that they could inhabit the land. Fear took over. And so the report back to the group was, nah, that's not for us. Moses sent out 12 spies to check out Canaan. All the spies see the same evidence. They all agreed on the condition of the land. But 10 of the 12, knowing that the land was good, proclaimed that it was not for them. They said, the people over there are powerful. Cities are strong and large. They're stronger than us over there, so we can't go. We got to stay here. We got to hang out in the wilderness. We got to box ourselves into what we know and what feels comfortable. We can't rise above our here and now. We can't rise above the label they put on us. We can't break the family curse. We can't fight for God's promise because we've made it as far as we can go. And their intimidation is not necessarily unwarranted. History shows that Canaan was a highly civilized society. The land was filled with several walled cities that served as centers of the state, and each had their own king or mayor and army. In other words, they weren't walking into my little hometown with 2 traffic lights and 2 stop signs. They were looking at a God promise that was bigger than their comprehension and ability. This morning, some of us are in the same exact place. The vision God has given us for our lives, the promise that God has given us for our future. It's more than we can see with our human eyes. It's more than we can understand in our finite minds. It's beyond our natural ability. And so we have to sit with how we respond when we get a glimpse of our Canaans. How do we respond when we get a short clip of God's promises for our lives? Text shows us that among the spies, there were 10 who were downtrodden and defeated mentally. But there was one who said, we can do it. We should rise up. We should go to the place God promised us and take possession of the land. 10 said this won't work, but there was one who understood that risers are willing to go against the grain because they can function in uncertainty. Uncertainty is not the equivalent of chaos. It's not confusion. Rather, it's recognition that though I may not understand the bigger picture of what is unfolding around me, and I may not have all the details of what is happening to me, I am certain that the God of my ancestors is still orchestrating my story. And so when everyone else says that's impossible, I can declare that all things are possible for those who believe, because I function in uncertainty, knowing that I serve a certain God. In the presence of naysayers, Caleb stood up and declared a yes over his life and his future. Caleb was bold enough to take a stand because he was a riser. He recognized that risers are willing to go against the grain and function in uncertainty. Risers are willing to be bold in their faith and are comfortable being in the minority. They don't need lottie-dottie and everybody in their corner cheering for them. It's nice to have an amen squad. It's nice to have your friends pushing you on. It's nice to have somebody hollering your name and rooting for you. But risers recognize that sometimes you have to be bold enough to walk by faith, even if it's just you and the Lord. Caleb took a stand by himself. He saw the same giants as everyone else. But in the face of the unknown and the unclear, he is certain they can possess the land. Not only did he believe this in his heart, but he professed it out of his mouth. He recognized that it is still true that life and death rest in the power of the tongue. Mount Calvary rising is our choice. But we must be willing to speak a language that's different than the group. Rising is a faith choice. It's a faith declaration. We have to speak those things that are not as though they are. God said the land was theirs. So the spies allowing intimidation and fear to cause them to stop declaring God's promise was unfortunate. And if I'm honest, it would be beyond me if I didn't understand our human tendency. Because we struggle with God taking us to the next level. If you don't, I do. When we don't see the promise that God has in store for us, but we find ourselves in the middle of the journey, we struggle. If we didn't see God's promise, we might not have to struggle because we wouldn't have an expectation because we have no context of what it is that God is doing. But when we get a glimpse of what God is promising us, we begin to struggle because the journey is long. The journey is filled with mountains and valleys, and it's hard to hold on and see what God is doing when we can't see the promise when we find ourselves in the valley. It's the reminder that the promise is bigger than our human capabilities. But I want to help us this morning because if God said it's ours, not if you said it's yours or if I said it's mine, but if God said it's ours, then why are we still declaring that it's too much, it's too overwhelming, it's too intimidating, it's too big, and the burdens are more than we can bear? If God said it's ours, we can put it in God's hands. I remember when we were building the Family Life Center, we used to walk around here saying, and it is so. Because we believed that it was so, even though it was nothing but cars parked on dirt in the parking lot. And if God said it was so then, it is still so now. It can't be too much if God says it's ours. Might feel like too much, and our discomfort with growth may kick in the high gear, but if God says it's ours, we got to speak a language different than the group. We got to be like Mary. The angel showed up and said, Mary, you're going to bring forth a child. And this promise didn't make sense. And Mary's response was, God's will be done. We got to be like Abraham. Y'all know it took forever for God to deliver on the promise. But when God did deliver on that promise and God asked Abraham to sacrifice that promise, he put the promise on the wood and waited. Watched for God to perform a miracle. We have to change our language to align with God's promises. We got to change our language to align with a life guided by faith and trust in a power that's greater than us. We got to be able to say, let God's will be done, because with all its ambiguity, with all its unknowns, God's will is still best for us. Go against the grain. Speak differently. And then, y'all, we got to refuse to embrace a mindset of self-defeat. Refuse to embrace a mindset of self-defeat. There are already enough forces working against us. We don't need to join their number. We don't need to partner with them speaking defeat over our own lives. We have to watch our words and guard our minds, because we can't walk in victory while talking like we've already lost. Chapter 13, verse 31, text says that the other men, the runners, said, we are not able to go up against this people, for they are stronger than we. Y'all, they took the L before they showed up for the game. Unlike Caleb and Joshua, they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They knew the land was filled with milk and honey. They knew that the fruit was so big, the text says that it took two people to carry the grapes. It wasn't like the grapes we get in the grocery store. It was giant clusters of grapes. They knew that the land was God's promise to the chosen people, but they were defeated mentally. Nobody else had to defeat them because they had already defeated themselves in their mind. See, runners, they can't focus on the good. They can't focus on the potential because they focus their energy on the things that are overwhelming to them. They thrive by fanning the flame of fear. Don't you know that there are some people that want you and I to run from God's promises for our lives because of their own fears and insecurities? And so they'll put seeds of doubt in our minds if we let them. But y'all, we got to be careful. We can't let the runners make us miss our blessing. God has called us to be risers. We can't let our own doubts cause us to miss God's promises for our lives. We cannot run from the very things that God is trying to use to bless us because there are giants in those places. Giants in those things, giants in those people that seem too big. When the giants show up, don't run, declare, if God said it, I believe it, and it is so. Put a scripture on your lips and walk around saying, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image and likeness. I dare you to declare that you will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I dare you to profess that I shall live and not die. I dare you to start praying over your life. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, and nothing will be impossible with God. I just need us to declare to ourselves today that I refuse to embrace a self-defeated mindset. Last thing that I want to glean from the text today is that risers recognize the source of their strength. In chapter 14, the Bible tells us the people wept aloud and raised their voices all night long. They lost sleep over their fears. They began declaring their desire to willfully return to a life of slavery. And that's mind-blowing until we start thinking about ourselves and the promises that God has shown us that feel overwhelming. Promises that are so vast that at some point we either turned around and returned to the life of our past, or we were only stopped by the grace of God. I'm talking somebody prayed for us because we were just getting ready to take our first step back in the wrong direction. And somebody prayed and caught us before our foot slipped. And so while it seems strange that the Israelites thought about returning to Egypt and returning to slavery, it's not unusual. And if we're not careful, that could be us even now. Hear what Joshua and Caleb said. The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Mount Calvary, if y'all don't remember anything that I've said this morning, if you can't manage to go against the grain, if you can't speak a different language, if you can't shift your mindset, I'm begging you to do this one thing. Recognize the source of your strength and your protection. We can't do anything without God's power. We need God to lead and guide and direct us. That's the only way that we can stay on the journey. You see, in the 14th chapter, the spies who choose to run didn't make it to the promised land. They were struck down by a plague and they died. Not only that, those who grumbled and complained and refused to trust God, they didn't make it either. They suffered and they died in the wilderness, but Joshua made it. He saw the same thing that they saw. His declaration was different. Joshua made it. Text says Caleb made it. And even after suffering, the descendants of the runners made it too. But Joshua and Caleb made it because they put their trust in God. It's not about understanding the promise. It's not about the size of the promise. It's about whether or not we're willing to trust God in the uncertainty of the promise. Running does not have to be our fate. We can choose to rise. I want us to ponder these questions this morning. Somewhere along the way, have we concluded that the promise costs too much? That the risk is too great? That the possibility of failure outweighs the potential of God's fulfillment? And in doing so, have we abandoned what God promised because we deemed it too dangerous to believe? If God made the promise, then what keeps us from pursuing it? If God has opened the door, what keeps us standing on the threshold? If God is leading, what keeps us from following? Will you rise above what you may be feeling and stay on the journey to God's promise for your life? Or will you run back to what feels comfortable because God's promise feels too overwhelming?
Thank you for engaging in the ministry of giving. You can go to our website and click the Give tab. You can call the church office and give your gift with your debit or credit card. You can mail your gift to the church. You can bring your gift to the church during office hours. Thank you for engaging in the ministry of giving.